Welcome to the New York Business Leaders Podcast, presented by the Coyle Group. We interview the most interesting and influential business leaders in New York and hear their stories of success, challenges, and lessons learned while building their businesses and personal brands. New episodes drop weekly, so please be sure to subscribe to get updates in your favorite stream. Without further delay, here's your host of the New York Business Leaders Podcast, Gordon Coyle.
Welcome back to the New York Business Leaders Podcast and Happy New Year. I'm your host, Gordon Coyle. Today I get a chance to catch up with Jeanette Gisbert, who's the Executive Director of Volunteer New York, a nonprofit organization headquartered in Westchester County, servicing 3 downstate counties of Rockland, Westchester, and Putnam. In a nutshell, what Volunteer New York does is align potential volunteers with volunteer opportunities with nonprofit organizations in the 3 counties I just mentioned. Volunteer New York is a pretty well-known organization in downstate, but I'm betting that a lot of people don't know the degree and scope of what this organization actually does. It's pretty amazing. This is a great conversation you don't want to miss, especially if you live or work in downstate New York. I have Jeanette's contact info in the show notes, but if you'd like to see the website, just go to volunteernewyork.org, and that's all spelled out, and you'll see how they match up volunteers with opportunities. Now, I'm looking for interesting people to join me on this show in 2023. If you have a story that you'd like to share and tell on this podcast, please, reach out to me and let's make that happen. My contact info is also in the show notes, and I look forward to chatting with you. Thanks. Also, I'd like to thank everyone who has listened or watched this podcast over the last couple of years. I appreciate the time you've spent with me and my guests. Let's all make 2023 awesome. Now, on to the show. Welcome back to the New York Business Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Gordon Coyle, and today we've got Jeanette Gisbert from Volunteer New York with us to tell us all about her organization. Jeanette, how are you doing? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Gordon. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you here. This is the first podcast of the new year, 2023, so you should feel very honored.
It's a great way to kick off 2023, I would say.
Yeah. And for my regular listeners and viewers, I apologize for not having a robust lineup towards the end of the year. December was a little sparse, but life kind of got in the way of doing podcasts. So hopefully we'll have a good lineup of folks over the next several weeks for the show. So Jeanette, why don't you take a couple minutes and introduce yourself, tell us about Volunteer New York, and we'll take it from there.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks so much. Again, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jeanette Gisbert. I'm the Executive Director at Volunteer New York. Volunteer New York is a local nonprofit organization based here in Westchester County. We serve Westchester, Putnam, and Rockland counties. And Volunteer New York's mission is to mobilize our community to address its greatest challenges. And so we believe that in harnessing people power, volunteers to address community needs and issues will help create kind of a vibrant and resilient and equitable community where everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential. And so, that's what we do. We're very focused again on this idea that volunteerism and service matters. And we accomplish our mission through a variety of programs and strategies. At the core of what we do is an online database. So, Gordon, a few years ago, our umbrella organization, which is called Points of Light, released a survey that shared that 44% of survey respondents said they didn't volunteer because they don't know where to get started and they don't know how to connect their action to larger change. And I remember reading that, and I've been in this business a long time, and it was still surprising to me that in this information-rich world that we function in, that individuals were still saying they didn't know where to start their volunteer journey or their volunteer experience. I interpreted that not to kind of, uh, go against the data, but I interpreted that more as maybe they're looking not only for kind of how to get started, but they're looking for organizations that bring some credibility, right? They know that if they reach out to this organization, someone's going to call them back, or they know that this organization has a mission that's really addressing a community need. And so I kind of added kind of a different spin on it. But that's what Volunteer New York does, is we make it easy for people to find those organizations in our community that are addressing needs. And as I was saying before, at the core of what we do is an online database. So people come to volunteernewyork.org, they create a profile, and then they have access to hundreds of local volunteer opportunities at other nonprofit organizations that need the volunteer power to accomplish their mission. And then in addition to that, we have programs that over time we have conceived and operationalized based on community needs. For example, we have a community-wide action day around 9/11, which is a national day of service and remembrance, but we give people an opportunity to mobilize locally. We have a board training and matching program. Every nonprofit organization has a board of directors. Those are volunteer roles, and it's a request that we receive a lot from our nonprofit partners. We have our Volunteer Spirit Awards, which is the area's largest volunteer recognition event. And so really shining the light on what volunteer and volunteerism does for our community. We work with local businesses to engage their employees. We have a program for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, finding really meaningful and impactful ways for them to connect to their community through volunteerism. So lots of different strategies, but all really focused on people.
Great. I think that's a great introduction. And my brain was starting to click about a bunch of different questions I got for you. So how many nonprofits are kind of like organized within Volunteer New York that you're working with?
Yeah, so I would say that at any given time, we're working with about 300 nonprofit organizations. So that's a combination of folks who are in our database, or perhaps they're a partner of our RSVP program, which is a national service program for folks 55 and over, or we've partnered with them on a corporate engagement. It kind of varies. Some of them we do many, there are many points of engagement, but I would say at any given time around 300.
Okay. And I know that there may be some people watching and listening that are thinking, okay, I want to get involved, but I don't want to overcommit. I don't want a board position. So from the very high end of like serving on a board of a nonprofit to maybe just, I've got a 12-year-old that I want to expose to some event of nonprofit community service. I'm assuming that there's that great span of two things and everything in between.
That's right. It's a whole continuum of service is kind of how we like to talk about it. And you're absolutely right. Not everyone is interested or even understands what it means to be a board member, or just is kind of just trying to figure out what's that first step that I can take to connect to my community. And so what's really great about our database is that you can search by time commitment. You can search by opportunities that are kind of one day, or you can search by things that are ongoing. So, if you're looking for that kind of, done in a day experience, you can, explore that. Or if you're looking to connect to an organization to make more of a commitment, you can do that as well. We also have a whole section of volunteer opportunities curated from our database, but that are youth and family friendly. You had talked about kind of your 12-year-old. So we have a youth app also that young people and their parents can download on their phone. And it's again, essentially kind of a curated list of the opportunities that we have in our database, but they're broken down by age. And then it also has some articles and information about why young people should be volunteering and kind of what some of the benefits and some of the impact is. So, we're really trying to kind of meet people where they are. and educate and inform individuals of what our community needs are and what they can do to affect change.
So territorially, you talked about Rockland, Westchester, and Putnam counties.
Mm-hmm.
So 3 downstate counties. Are there other organizations, kind of umbrella organizations like Volunteer New York, upstate and downstate from us?
That's a great question. So Volunteer New York is actually part of a network of volunteer connector organizations, if you will, all under the umbrella of Points of Light, which is a global presidential legacy organization. There's about 150, I think, affiliates across the world that are all in the business of making it easy for people to volunteer. We all kind of take a little bit of we all take very kind of community-centered approaches. So whatever our community needs is kind of what we're working on, but again, very focused on volunteerism. So in our area, there is in the city, there's an organization called New York Cares, which I actually worked at New York Cares before I joined Volunteer New York, which again, I've been in the business a long time. There's also Jersey Cares. So they cover kind of most of New Jersey, actually. And I think that there is a Points of Light affiliate further, like in Western New York. But I think those are kind of the area, kind of in the kind of nearby. There's a hands-on Hartford, Connecticut. There's an affiliate as well. But it's not in every community. And I think that makes us pretty special, is that, not every community has this organization that is in the business of, creating the pathways that convert good intentions into action. And, I just want, I want everybody to know about us and to remember that when they're thinking about how they might want to volunteer or connect to their community, that in their community, there's a resource to help them do that.
Great. What are the big needs within our, tri-county community that you see most often in terms of demand for volunteers?
Yeah, there's real there's some seasonality to it, but the needs, frankly, are broad, and so it really it's hard to answer that question.
Maybe I'll refine it and just say, are they predominantly basic human need type volunteering things around food, shelter, clothing?
Yeah, no. So I would say no, I would say that they're broader than that. So certainly food insecurity is a huge issue in our county and our community, and really, the needs became even more clear during the pandemic. But certainly all of any issues related to education, and whether you are a mentor or a tutor or helping a first generation student fill out their FAFSA to get into college. Really, kind of many examples within this whole bucket of education. One need that we hear a lot about, especially through our RSVP program, is for volunteer drivers. And so there are a couple of organizations in Westchester that recruit volunteers to help drive seniors to mostly medical appointments, but sometimes also to like supermarkets and things like that. And we hear feedback from those partner organizations that they have to turn seniors away that call them because they don't have enough drivers to take them to their medical appointments. And so that's actually a huge need. And we can debate, Gordon, the how efficient the bus system is and all of that. But, transportation, especially for our older population, is a challenge. So that's actually something that we're always recruiting for us, especially since many of our partners, as I said, through our RSVP program, do that work. But yeah, food insecurity, education, transportation. This time of year, actually, There are a lot of projects related to the environment and the removal of invasive vines, which is a huge issue in our community. And a lot of that work happens in the wintertime when all the leaves are down. And so you try to cut the vines now so that when the springtime comes, they're not suffocating the trees, which is terrible.
Yep.
So it really, it really depends. And the roles depend too. Sometimes you can work directly with a participant or a student, or maybe you want to use your skill set and help draft a marketing plan, or maybe you want to do some database work, or maybe there's the possibilities of how we can harness people power in support of our community is really endless.
Yeah, I think when a lot of people think about volunteerism, they view it through the lens of packing up meals, delivering meals, doing very traditional, which is great,
which is super important.
Yeah, they never think about, well, like you mentioned, I'm a wizard at digital marketing or database management or creating spreadsheets. And there's organizations that need that help that can't afford to pay a marketing firm for getting their message out. So, I mean, I would never have thought of that kind of stuff. So that's interesting.
Yeah, it really, and that's one of the things that we do at Volunteer New York, because we're talking to so many nonprofit organizations, we're able to cross-pollinate, if you will, to be able to say, we have experience with this nonprofit organization that piloted this really interesting way to use a volunteer, and it worked really well. And so maybe you might want to consider that over here as well, whether it be we call that kind of more skilled-based volunteering. So whether it be a skill or a project, which again, it takes work, right? The nonprofit has to think about kind of what the need is. Ideally, they've kind of drafted a little bit of a description of what it is it need, of what it is. But when you find that right volunteer that you can hand that opportunity over to, and they take the ball and run with it, then that's really powerful. We actually, I'll share a little bit of a tangent. At our Volunteer Spirit Awards, which again is the region's largest volunteer recognition event, we recognize 6 local volunteers every year. I want to say maybe about 3 years ago now, one of the award winners was actually a volunteer who had created a database for a nonprofit organization that then was able to use the data that was collected via the database to track the efficacy of their program. And they were able to then apply for some pretty significant grants that allowed them to, support even more participants. And so you think like that's not, packing a meal, which again is super important. But that volunteer had tremendous impact on the trajectory of that organization and its ability to support community. And it started with this, this pipe dream of this database.
That's a great story because, the nonprofit may have thought, this is a good idea, but I'm not sure anybody's going to do it. Maybe somebody applied to do the job and they thought, I could help this organization out. And at the end of the day, they're getting a chunk of money from the government or wherever to further their broader mission. I mean, that's a great story because it kind of shows that the connections that you guys are making for people would not have otherwise happened probably. So pretty significant. Tell us about the impact of the pandemic on volunteerism in the region and how you're recovering from that.
Yeah, sure. So, I think that, everyone over the last 2 years, I've gotten asked a lot of like, what were you guys up to? Like, you must have been really slow. It must have been really quiet. Like, who was volunteering? And that's just not the case. So, in the first kind of 9 months of the pandemic, from, June 2020 to, 6 months or so after that, we saw a 100% increase in individuals coming to our website looking for volunteer opportunities. And that is behavior that we see and have seen pretty much after every disaster. And I call the pandemic a disaster because in my mind, that's that's what it felt like. It felt like a Hurricane Sandy disaster, like a 9/11 disaster. And what we've seen at Volunteer New York, and what many Volunteer Connect organizations see, is that after every disaster, whether it be natural or man-made, once individuals have kind of checked in with themselves and their families, and they feel like they're okay or kind of stabilized, there is this natural instinct to want to help. And we see it every single time. And so for us, the opportunity was, how do we harness all of these people that are coming to us wanting to help in a way that is safe and meaningful and helpful? And so for us, that became having conversations with those nonprofit partners about what volunteers could do either virtually. So, many mentoring and tutoring programs pivoted to Zoom or Teams. And so, hearing from other affiliates across the country and kind of figuring out who was doing it well, what worked, and bringing that knowledge here locally and figuring out how to do it. So what can people do virtually? What could people do at home? Like, DIY, whether it be, continuing to do no-sew fleece blankets from your home, but then sending them, in the mail. And then also our own programming, like what could we do virtually? So our board training program, we still ran it. We just did it virtually. And so still continuing to engage people. I think one of the things, we also recruited volunteers to help small businesses complete their PPP loans. So that was actually a really great partnership that we had with the county. We had volunteers who did kind of wellness check-in calls with seniors during that time to kind of just make sure that, they were doing okay. Everyone was isolated. Those phone calls are really meaningful. I think one of the things that we're most proud of is when the Westchester Medical Center was designated kind of the regional hub for the vaccination effort, once that became kind of stood up and they opened up the county center, they saw an opportunity to use volunteers to improve the patient experience. And so we ended up recruiting over 1,300 volunteers over 6 months. Who at the county center, and they acted as greeters, as line movers, as note takers, so non-medical volunteers, but they registered people, they took in affidavits, they kept the line moving so that we were getting as many people in as possible. And ultimately in that time period, there were 300,000 vaccines administered. So again, people, volunteer power. And so people were still, I shared this at the Volunteer Spirit Awards that year, which is in this time where everything was canceled, schools were canceled, meetings were canceled, travel plans were canceled, our community showed us that community could not be canceled.
Interesting. And just so when you were connecting volunteers with Westchester Medical Center or the county?
So people actually ended up signing up through us. So Volunteer New York became the engine, the machine through which people would register. And then we actually trained, at first we sent staff because that's our expertise, volunteer management. And then eventually we trained WMC Health staff at the county center to greet and train the volunteers so they were ready to go. But we were the mechanism through which people were signing up.
Interesting. And is that commonplace for Volunteer New York to be the nonprofit that people are kind of working through? I kind of always saw it as like an umbrella organization that dispatched the resources to the specific nonprofits in the area.
Yeah.
Or is it a combination of both?
It's a combination of both. So we do have programs that we run ourselves, such as our 9/11 day of service, right?
Yeah,
So that's a day of service where we plan different projects with our partners, but people are registering with us. Our board training program is another example of that. We have a leadership program where, people are registering with us and we organize that program. It's always in partnership though, Gordon, right? We always, for us, it's really important to always center what our community needs. And the question that we kept asking ourselves throughout the pandemic is, what does our community need Volunteer New York to be today? Right? In the midst of this global pandemic that no one has ever seen, and there's no playbook, like what does our community need? And as I said before, it was, nonprofits coming to us and saying, we think that there's still a role for volunteers to play in our organization, but we're not sure quite how. Like, can you help us think about how to pivot? Or, or organizations like WMC Health coming to us and saying, we think that there is a role for people to play in this recovery. Can you help us think about like what safe, appropriate, things for volunteers to do might be? So volunteers know when they're asked to do something and it's not actually making a difference, or it's just something. And so, ultimately that's not good for the volunteer and it's not good for the community.
So you guys play multiple roles, but collaboration is a big piece of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we have 3 beliefs at Volunteer New York. We have 2 values and 3 beliefs. We value community, we value volunteerism, and we believe everyone can serve, that volunteering is transformational, and the relationships matter. And we were talking about relationships before everybody was talking about relationships. And for us, relationships is an extension of what you're talking about, collaboration.
Yeah, that's great. Tell us a little bit about the board training course or thing that you do, because I've heard about it.
Yeah.
What does it focus on? I'm interested to hear more about that. I'm sure other people are too.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that opportunity. Because as I said, it's one of our most frequently asked kind of requests from our nonprofit partners, right? So every nonprofit organization, as I said, has a board of directors. All of those are volunteer roles. Some of the feedback that we heard years ago is, I might be interested in being a board member, but I have no idea what it means to be a nonprofit board member. And there's a lot of information. If you Google nonprofit board service, you get lots of information.
Yeah.
But we felt like what we could do, there was an opportunity for us to offer kind of a high level overview to at least kind of remove some of the initial barriers to taking action. So that's what we've tried to do. So it's called Board Boot Camp. And Board Boot Camp is typically a 2-morning program, 2 sessions. Each session is 2 hours. And the sessions are a combination of kind of like fundamental roles and responsibilities, and then a panel of individuals who were at board boot camp the year before, sitting in those seats, talking about their journey to board service. And we also usually have an executive director and maybe another person kind of just talking about real life. What does it mean to be a board member? And so individuals walk away with high level understanding of fiduciary responsibilities, what it means to be a board member, fundraising, a financial overview. So again, high level overview, and then real world examples from the panelists. And then at the end of the second session, the participants get a list, hot off the presses, of local organizations who are actively recruiting board members. And on the list, I mean, this last list had something like 50 organizations on it. They get a little blurb. They get high level, mission, when the meetings are they in the morning? Are they in the afternoon? Are they in Harrison? Are they in Rockland? Are they in person? Are they Zoom? Is there a give or get? Is there a specific skill set the organization is looking for? So that the participants can look and say, oh, I really that mission really speaks to me, but there's no way I'm ever getting to a meeting at 8 a.m. in Putnam or whatever it is. And then they express interest in meeting with different organizations. And then we bring everybody together in the culmination of the program, which is called board speed dating, which is essentially what it is. It's like 10-minute conversations. But they are really great conversation starters. And, nonprofits come back year after year because, overall, it's helped them grow their pipeline.
That's interesting. And how often do you do these board boot camps?
Yeah. So right now we have the capacity to do it once a year.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if there's anybody out there that wants to support us doing it twice a year, but I'd love to, but that's just not in our capacity right now. So right now we do it once a year. It's typically in the fall.
Okay.
And we are trying to partner with some other local organizations to kind of give some online tools and whatnot to keep the momentum going. Because again, our goal is to get people off the sidelines and connected to opportunities. But right now, we're able to do it once a year in the fall.
I would imagine it's a valuable training. I mean, over the years, I've sat on a lot of nonprofit boards, and I've experienced, really smart business people coming onto a board, and they don't get the mission. They forget that there's a mission here, and they only look at it as a business. And it's like, okay, does this fit the mission? Yep. And I'm sure that the board training that you guys do is kind of focused on making sure you don't lose sight of the fact that there's a reason you're here.
Exactly. And there's, and that's what the role of the board is. I mean, the role of the board is mission, vision, strategy, right?
Right.
And then hopefully you have a management team that is responsible for the day-to-day. Some nonprofits, depending on their life cycle, if they're just kind of starting out, a board might have more of a hands-on role, but you're absolutely right. And I will say, sometimes, I would say every kind of class has had a few folks that have come to board boot camp who are actually already board members, because they are interested in building their own foundation of knowledge. And we're pretty clear that it's very kind of fundamental, right, but they still want to attend, and I think that they still get something out of it.
Yeah. Do you have some big activities coming up for Martin Luther King Day?
So we do. So Martin Luther King is our second community-wide action day. And I'm sorry to say though, it's actually all sold out already.
Oh, okay.
Which is amazing.
Yeah.
This year we're doing kind of a smaller event on the day on Monday, January 16th. We're partnering with the AFIA Foundation, which is a great organization in Yonkers that collects medical supplies for regions in need. And we're going to do a project for that. But we also will have on our website kind of a curated list of other activities that are happening in the community, knowing that, for many, Martin Luther King Day, for many people, they refer to it as a day on, not a day off. And so they use it as an opportunity to serve. And so on our website, we'll have a list of other resources that people can look into.
That's great.
But our next big event is actually our Volunteer Spirit Awards, which will happen May 5th this year, a little later than usual. And here at the Tarrytown Marriott, and we're hoping to get 500 people in person. It's a breakfast, pausing to celebrate volunteerism, and we love it around here. It really, it's just this amazing opportunity to pause and reflect on what it is that we do.
That's great. I've been to several of those breakfasts over the years, and it's always kind of energizing to see the people that are leading the community in the area of volunteerism. So it's great.
Happy to
anything you want to talk about before we wrap up? Did we miss any major headings that you wanted to kind of hit on?
I think the only thing I'd like to say, Gordon, is I was listening to another podcast. Sorry.
Another one?
A different one. I know. Sorry. The other day, and it was about leadership, and it was kind of like a pretty well-known leadership guru person out there in the world. And they were talking about how they had been brought in by a big corporation to do some training. And the leaders within that corporation were talking about how their people aren't okay. Like their people are having a really hard time kind of recovering and getting through this pandemic, which was just this incredibly challenging time for so many reasons. And the leadership, guru person was like, of course they're not okay. Like human beings are kind of, even introverts like me are kind of naturally kind of social beings. And the pandemic really impacted all of our relationships and all of our connections and the ways that we interact with each other and with community. And I heard that, and it really landed for me, because I believe, Gordon, that volunteerism, and therefore Volunteer New York, can play a really important role in how individuals can start to reestablish those relationships and those connections with each other and with your community. And so, I hope that if anyone that's been listening, if they're feeling like they're struggling to do that and kind of struggling to, reestablish some of those connections and reestablish some of those relationships, and maybe they're not quite sure, maybe it's the gym for them, but maybe not, maybe it's something else. I would challenge them to think about volunteerism as maybe a first step to saying, you know what, it's time for me to get off my couch or out of my office or out and connect to my community. And I think service is a good way to start. So that's my one final thing I'd like to share.
I think it's a great way to wrap up the conversation, because it summarizes, I think, what a lot of people have been going through over the last few years with the pandemic, and their social structures have changed so much that they don't know what to do. They're kind of awkward just by regular living, So, and, so everybody knows, Jeanette and I know each other from networking. We're in a group together, and we saw, like, going from virtual meetings to live meetings, it was like a big love fest. Everybody was like so happy to be back together again, Really? And I think that's an experience that people would have with volunteering as well, being able to really get back in touch with people and themselves. So
I think that's true. So hopefully some folks will test our theory and report back.
Yeah. Jeanette, has been a great conversation. I appreciate you coming on and talking about Volunteer New York. If people wanted to find out more about Volunteer New York or get in touch with you about opportunities, how would they do that?
Sure, it's so easy. You can just visit our website, which is volunteernewyork, all spelled out, .org. And also, I'm very happy to share my email. It's Jeanette, JeAnette, @volunteernewyork.org. Please don't hesitate to reach out. We're really here to help. And Gordon, thanks so much for inviting me and for having me be your first guest of the year. It's a real honor.
Well, you're welcome. And I appreciate you spending the time with us. And, I would encourage anybody that's watching or listening to reach out to Jeanette. She's a very dynamic individual who can connect you to the right places that you feel like you want to get plugged into. So that's all great. And thank you. So I'll wrap it up and say that if you have an interesting story that you'd like to tell on this podcast, give me a call, drop me an email. I'll put my contact info as well as Jeanette's in the show notes and in the description box on YouTube, so it's easily accessible for you. And until next time, stay well.
That's it for this week's episode of the New York Business Leaders Podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. In the meantime, find more interviews and resources at nybusinessleaders.com.